It seems extraordinary that there's nothing that the coronavirus doesn't touch.
All see Black Lives Matter demonstrations.
Oppression is brought out.
So unfortunately, because I just feel like we're going down this road, we've been down this road before.
Things like we've had
Hello and welcome to Your Voice. I'm Tet Kofi. Take a stroll through the public spaces in London and England and you will hear many foreign languages spoken. After all, London is the most cosmopolitan city in the world, with black and minority ethnic groups numbering 3.3 million, being 40% of its population. But you will hear few people publicly speaking African languages. When they do, it'll be spoken between adults and rarely between African adults and their children. Now, statistics are not available for how many children from the diaspora speak their mother tongues. But with evidence that speaking the mother tongue aids the intellectual and emotional development of children, we wonder why this is so. Children of the diaspora in the UK are frequently reported as falling between two stools. While they have English or British nationality, many born here or arriving here at a young age often feel alienated from British culture, while having weak roots in their ancestral cultures. Now, as language is a key tool for maintaining a link with cultural heritage, we ask whether African children in the diaspora should learn their ancestral languages, and whether we should be worried that more of them don't speak those tongues. As always, this is your show, your voice, your shout. So please do get in touch and have your say via the number we'll be playing on the screen below. Now, here to help resolve this problem are people who have both lived and researched these issues. Children's author and founder of Afro Eclectic, Isobel Pobee Mensah, and author and lecturer at North Kent College, Dr. Nuur Hassan. A real pleasure to have you join us. Now let's dive right in. Dr. Hassan, what does the science say about speaking one's mother tongue and its impact on your emotional, intellectual, and other social development?
Thanks for having me on your show. I think there's a lot being written about from the point of view of second language rather than the mother tongue. Right. I think emphasis is based on anyone who speaks, anyone who's bilingual has a number of benefits. So the research, if I go through quite a number of research, there was things being found, accumulated language bonuses, which means anyone who speaks a multiple language, a bilingual, will earn more than the one who speaks a monolingual.
That's an economic benefit. I mean, they earn more money.
Absolutely, economic benefit.
Right.
Although I have to emphasize, this was particularly, the emphasis was on the European language,
right.
French and English, and French and English and the German and so on and so forth.
But within the person, if you speak more than one language, aren't there supposed to be benefits which accrue intellectually, your capacity for cognitive learning and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. I mean, there was another research published in the International Journal for Bilingualism, which talks about anyone who speaks the mother tongue or a second language has improved their cognitive because they use the second language or the mother tongue as a memory aid memoir. Okay. So therefore, there's a cognitive benefits, there's economic benefits, there's a social benefits.
Fantastic. Okay, let me come to you, Izzy. Do you speak your mother tongue?
No, but I understand it more.
So you hear it. I mean, when people are speaking
yes.
it, you will understand the gist of what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
Do you feel as if you're missing something from not being able to actually, go beyond hearing, but also actually communicating it?
Absolutely, 100%.
And what do you think you're missing?
I miss a sense of belonging sometimes in family functions and events, or it becomes that question about, am I British, am I African, or Ghanaian for that matter. Okay. So that's what I feel is missing for me.
How does it make you feel? I mean, when that kind of conundrum hits you, what's
it's
the
a
impact?
less than. So if I'm in a family function in England, especially when I was younger, it would be, oh, why don't you know your language? It's, we speak Ga here and we're going to only speak Ga to you. And that became a way of learning and understanding, but not the confidence to speak.
Right, got it. Okay. Now, Nuur, if I may ask you, why are Africans the least likely to speak their mother tongues proficiently? After all, we've all been through the same colonial experience. People from Africa, people from Asia, people from the Far East. Many of these people were all colonized by the Brits. But why is it that the Africans have such a hard time speaking their own language?
Very good question. I think the research is still very immature on that one. But I think there's a number of factors which one can draw from that conclusion. Okay. One is it's really it's a tough call when you have the majority of African countries speaking English as their official language. I can call off the top of my head the Nigerians actually have an English as an official. Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, the list can go on and on. Right. But again, you can argue Pakistanis have also the English as an official language. Or Indians also, although they have Hindi, they have English as a functioning language. But
if you walk into Asda tomorrow, absolutely. You'll see the Pakistani mum speaking to her little toddler in Urdu.
Yes, absolutely. But I think there's a number of factors that one has to look into, and I've done that in my research, which is if you look at the households, if you compare to two different African household and an Asian household, what you will see, the Asian household, they still have the extended family. So you have the aunties, the grandma, the grandfather. Still, recently arrived, even if they don't have recently arrived, they still speak the heritage language, where kids can pick up. Whereas a grandma from Nigeria might still speak English. And if she even were here before the family or the kids were born, she might have came through a visa where she was herself a professional. Right. So therefore, there's a lack of social capital in that angle. Right. It could also be recent arrivals. They prefer the children to pick up the English. The case of assimilations, making sure that they always speak and they do well in the language. Because of back home, it
was a mark of status to be able to speak English rather than your own language.
Absolutely.
Has this hurt? Do you think it has hurt our community?
Yes.
In what way?
So from my experience, my parents used Ga at home as a language to communicate between the two of them. Right. And there's 4 of us. Right. And whilst when we were babies, that was the only tongue we heard. Right. As soon as we went to school, it changed. Right. The reason it has a negative knock-on effect is for those very reasons. I have children and they grew up with children who always spoke different languages, English as a second language per se. And they seem to do a lot better academically. Okay,
I'm going to go to a graphic now which talks about, here in London, the top 10 foreign languages which are spoken here in London. Bear in mind that black and minority ethnics form 40% of the population, which is 3.3 million souls in London. Let's have a look along here. Top is Bengali. This is London. Next is Polish, next is Turkish, Gujarati, Punjabi, Urdu, French, Arabic, Tamil, Portuguese, and lo and behold, not one African language. Does that surprise you, Isobel?
That surprises me because I used to work in the NHS and that on wards you would hear people speaking Tree. Right. So, yeah, it surprises.
It's a fact.
Sure. Quite surprising, actually. I mean, CityLit is a very reliable source,
reliable organisation.
And I'm afraid I don't know how they've collected this data. Right. But it's quite surprising to even not see one single.
Interesting. I have another graphic here which I like to go to with actually extending it beyond London now into the whole of the United Kingdom. The top 20 foreign languages, non-British languages, which are spoken are, obviously number 1 is English. Next is Polish, 546,000, 500,000. Does that surprise you at all?
Very surprising to me, yes.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
It doesn't surprise me, actually, because I used to live in Ealing, and everywhere you went, you heard Polish. Now, can we go, there's a second page to this. Can we go to the second page? There we are. And at number 15 in the whole of Britain, highlighted dark, is Somali. That is the only African language in the top 20 of foreign languages spoken in the UK. No.
I think my only guess will be, I mean, if you look at the history of Somalia, yes, on the north there was a British colony was there. On the south is Italian, but Somalia predominantly is Italian Arabic based language. Maybe that's why the English has not been as strong as other African countries.
Strongly assimilated.
Yeah. I mean,
and of
that's
course
the
there was a
only
huge influx of Somalis when their difficulties started over there. But Isobel, does this make you feel sad?
I'm glad it's there. I'd rather that there was at least one African language than none at all. I think the fact that we still see Somalians as still quite new to the UK in comparison to other African countries means that it still may be at a very early stage. Let's see what the next couple of generations will do.
But it is also interesting that because they're recent immigrants here, world conditions and world attitudes have changed.
Absolutely.
And the hegemony, if you like, the grip of the English language around the globe may slowly be receding, Dr. Hassan?
Well, it might well be, but obviously because of the internet and because of the hold now academic literature, I think English has got to stay there. To be honest with you, in terms of hegemonic positioning, so it's universal, and I think even if you go to Africa, one of the most well-paying jobs are now English-speaking people. Right. So there are even jobs where they don't even ask you any degrees or any other specialism other than speaking perfect English. So therefore, I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, obviously, I am not against it, and we are not against the English.
We'll come back.
It's the skills. We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that in a second. Sure. Look, we're going to take a short break now, but please join us again for part 2, where we'll be continuing the conversation. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back to Your Voice with me, Ted Kofi, and my guests, Isobel Pobee Mensah and Dr. Nuur Hassan. Now, we ran an Instagram poll and took some comments. Actually, the response to this particular set of comments was the greatest we've ever had. And I just want to read out to you a few of the comments that were made in response to the question, were you embarrassed to speak an African language as a teen? This is young people speaking now. They said, I already had an accent, so I felt uncomfortable that I'd be made fun of. Didn't like it. Yep, other African languages got picked on at schools. Patois was always subconsciously intertwined with my African language, said Tyrone Chambers. And then there was another. My Caribbean parents did not want to acknowledge that we were of African origin. I'm learning Kikongo now. That's at Yaya Misps. Now, what is curious is that when we asked the same question of adults, we asked, as an adult, are you embarrassed to speak an African language in public? Their responses are dramatically different. Now, I'm proud, as I got older, to start to learn my culture and heritage. That's Tiz 25. Absolutely not. Pride and joy. Now I correct anyone that calls me a French person. That's Beauté by Brenda. Another person said, no, I love speaking in public, to be frank. It's part of my identity. That's Jolene Masasa. And not learning Kikongo of the Congo and show it off at any opportunity to share to date. And that's Yaya Misps. See the contrast between when she was young and when she's older. How does this strike you?
I think that's a normal experience.
Right.
I think most really young people don't want to. It's embarrassing, but actually, as I've seen a lot of that growing up, getting older and wanting to learn. I think when it was my turn, there wasn't those resources. Now there are. Okay.
Can I? Of course, you're a children's book author.
Yes.
And you have recently launched a new book.
I have, yes.
How does this connect to the question of speaking African languages? Of course, your book is in English, isn't it?
My book is in English, but what I've taken to doing specifically with the second book, Adjo's Paddling Pool, is to include symbols, Adinkra symbols that relate to our heritage.
Right.
Because again, for me, the representation is really important. Yes, I can't speak the language, but I'm definitely starting the narrative whereby it's going to be okay.
So people are going to be more comfortable. You think young children are going to be more comfortable knowing the icons and the symbols of their heritage?
Are there? Yes, absolutely.
What does the research say about this sort of thing?
There's a few things. Yeah, there's a few things about self-esteem, and
Right.
I think it's the opposite to what you've just read from the comments of the viewers.
Okay.
There's a self-esteem in terms of at the young age when young African heritage actually go out and visit their grandma, grandfather heritage. If they go back again to the original country, they tend to have a problem in terms of communicating with their extended family.
Okay.
And that causes a bit of embarrassment. And I've
What,
seen
amongst the young people,
among
you
the
mean?
young, yeah.
Okay.
While they were still, they didn't want to speak their own mother tongue
Right.
among their friends
Right.
in an English setting.
Right.
But when they go back again to their heritage,
Right.
they found that. So therefore, there's an increased evidence in the literature that actually kids are now starting to be quite confident speaking in their own mother tongue.
Right.
So the tide seems to be sort of turning around. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that now it's a good idea actually to expose the young children of the diaspora to elements of their culture
It
because
is.
the opposition
And
to it
nowadays,
is not as great.
obviously, because of what's happening now, I think people are trying to catch up with the heritage, and they're trying to find. I mean, it's not only in Britain, but if you go to the States and the United States of America and other European countries, people are trying to yearn. Going back again to their roots and learning and so on and so forth. So
some of them are even changing their names.
That's right.
Yes,
so there's a renaissance going on among non-English speakers in terms of the mother tongue as a mother tongue.
You were educated in this country, weren't you?
I was.
Okay.
Yes.
So how did it feel to perhaps speak a form of English which was a dialect of traditional spoken English within the mainstream of society? Whereas within the educational system, you were learning what was called, received pronunciation, quote unquote, posh English, whereas the language you were actually maybe conversing in amongst your peers, even though you didn't speak an African language, was more of a slangy sort of language. What was the impact on your education in that?
I think it's weird for me because we started off, my sister and I particularly, were in private school. So when I did transfer over to what we'd call a state school, we were sort of seen as children with plums in our mouths and stuff. So over time, what's happened is I actually have a sense of dumbing down, for want of a better phrase.
Absolutely.
When I had cousins or any friends who came from Ghana, whilst we were in school, primary school in particular, they would be speaking the Queen's English and couldn't understand why they were getting picked on.
Right.
So I've gone from speaking the Queen's English to being picked on to sort of dumbing down and then having other Ghanaian friends from Ghana with a higher standard of education, if I'm allowed to say that, coming here being put down a year because of the assumption of being an African and then speaking better than me, better than anybody in the class.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Why does this happen? Is this a question of, is this a hangover from colonial days and the generally kind of perceived sense that anything that's African is of less worth, less value, and so on? But why does this happen?
I think it's you absolutely put it rightly because it's a colonial leftover. I think it's a pressure. It's because one of the jobs that colonialists did in the first place was to eradicate and destroy and dismantle all traditions and then language and so on and so forth. Remember, Africans are orally rich society. They use language to communicate, to articulate, to speak, and so on and so forth. So one of the first things the European colonizers did was actually to dismantle that structure.
Presumably that would have been a strong unifying force and kind of a point of coalition.
Absolutely, and then that created a stigma because if you offered a job in the civil services through the colonial structure and you're earning more, why would you go back again to the language that your ancestors spoke? Where
And of course, as a civil servant, you would have to be working in English.
Absolutely. So I mean, I spoke English when I've learned English in Somalia,
Right.
but when I came to here, I already spoke English. I thought I spoke a very good English. I mean, the received pronunciation, you just quoted.
Right.
But when I joined my colleagues here, same thing happened. People looked at me and it's as if I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. And then I had to really read my lips, if you like, and then try and see if I can just stay within the crowd. So there's a similar experience, although I was older than you actually when I came here, but it's a simimer experience.
It's such a pity that the time has gone so fast, but I'm going to go first from you, Izzy, then to you, Noor. Do you think African children should learn their ancestral languages, even though they're born here and they grew up here and they are effectively British?
To be honest, I think I would urge all black children to learn an African language, because it is about that sense. For me, it is about that sense of belonging. It is when we're going through all these troubles and feeling that Black Lives Matters, for instance, I do think it's important that we have a language. It doesn't matter what African language it is to be personally,
Right.
but it should have one.
So that gives them a sense of belonging
of,
with the ethnic group and
Yes.
so on and so forth.
Yes.
Is that partly your mission in creating these books?
Well, I wrote the books because my daughter couldn't see herself in school. She was in a school with black children, but she couldn't see herself in the literature. And so we would take an experience from her day at nursery. She's 26 now. We would take an experience and we would write it down and I'd read it to her, and then she had a sense of belonging. I now have a grandchild. I'm not having that happen again.
Absolutely.
This is a bit of an heirloom, so this can be passed on.
Fantastic. No, do you think African children in the diaspora should learn their ancestral languages? And do you think parents whose children don't speak these ancestral languages should feel as if they've got a little bit more to do?
I think they should. I think I'll even go beyond that. I think the community leaders should push harder, because we can say all day, I mean, we have to learn the language, but if we're not doing an action, if we're not taking steps towards that, then nothing will happen. I think community leaders should push policymakers to change. And I would go, because you and I, we win in education, I think we should advocate, petition schools to offer GCSE level language, as they do in Urdu, in Hindi, in German, in Arabic, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we should do an action rather than really sit and
So basically, what you're both calling for is that you don't do actions without spending money, that there should be public money spent on this issue.
Absolutely.
And you can justify that as something which society would benefit from?
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't understand why you would have other Asian languages and there's not one African language on the curriculum. I mean, most of the people I know, when they're going to learn a language, they're not necessarily going to learn Ga, but I've got even Jamaican friends who will pick up Tree. Imagine that being taught at GCSE.
Just when it's getting interesting, I'd like to thank you, Isobel, very much for joining us. Dr. Nuur Hassan, thank you also for joining us. And that's the end of part 2. Join us after the break when I'll be joined by Dr. Louise Kwarteng and Naa Adjelley Gbojorr. Thank you very much. Welcome back. You're watching Your Voice with me, Ted Kofi, and my guests for this half are Senior Lecturer at the University of Greenwich, Dr. Louise Kwarteng, and founder of the Gardangme.com group, Naa Adjelley Gbojorr. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. Now, the first thing I need to ask is that how, in your experience and based on your research, Louisa, has the pressure to assimilate affected the learning and usage of the African language amongst the African community?
Okay, so I look at this sort of two generationally. So if I think about, for instance, those children who were born and raised here during the 1960s, and our parents came at that time, they came here as students, you know, they were sort of balancing work and then balancing their education. Right. And if they had children, what they were doing was that they were sending their children to foster homes to learn, well, yes, just so that they could manage the three things together. And I think at that time, like, assimilation was really, really, it was the ultimate goal. It was the ultimate goal. And I think, you know, the fostering was part of that. I mean, obviously there was other reasons for it, but it was
around about what time period would this have been?
I would say from the maybe early 1960s to the sort of late 70s, although some people are still doing that now. Right. So I think, you know, there was a pressure to it. Our parents wanted those children to assimilate. Right. So I think this was part of the reason why they did it. And then also when you look at the broader social context of when they were growing up then, when it was really very badly racist. Right. So again, you know, one of the ways perhaps people navigated that was through trying to assimilate, and sometimes it's very difficult to.
Do you think it worked? I mean, in the research that you have done on this, I mean, what were the human impacts of this sort of thing on the children?
Well, I think there was a lot of them, really. So first of all, if we take the psychological aspect of, you know, breaking that attachment bond, because a lot of these kids were fostered at sort of from the ages of, I don't know, some of them from birth even. So like if they haven't had that attachment to their biological parent, so that's one thing. And then growing up in a context that's very different to them, to their African culture, this is going to have an impact on you emotionally and socially, because you don't fit in any of the two contexts.
Naa Adjelley, how does that sound to you? Now, this must have been going on before your time, because you would be the generation after, you would have been too young. For this sort of thing to be going on. How does that sound to you?
You know, I agree with what she's saying, especially in the sense that assimilation, you're coming to a new country, and to be honest, for me, I feel it's like a kind of safety net, in that if you were perceived to be too other, there was literally, in many cases, a danger to your life. So you almost wanted to assimilate to be safe and seen as not a threat to what would have been termed as British ideals at the time. I also think there was part of it where we kind of, the wanting to assimilate was also us wanting to do that, in the sense that culturally, it's almost like we put the Western culture and ideals on a pedestal. Right. And so we want our children, especially when they go, oh, my children was born and abroad and this is how she is, that's why she doesn't eat that. And you say it almost with a kind of pride. That your child is not like you, she is more like a, I don't know, African 2.0, another level kind of assimilation. So I think it's
Westernized African
was kind of
pedestalized,
is on a pedestal and, you know, more respected, and it was seen that you were more educated as a result. So yes, we had a threat to our life, but the other one was we wanted that assimilation so we can prove we have bettered in terms of our next generation. So
back in these days, and based on your research, Louise, what were societal values towards African languages? So if a child rocked up in a situation where they were being fostered, presumably it wouldn't have been particularly welcome. No. They would actually have probably actively tried to stop them?
No, it was. I mean, and one of the things was, in a lot of cases, the people that I was speaking to, their parents consciously didn't teach them those African languages because they were afraid, not only in terms of broader societal assimilation and where they were going with the foster homes, but it was also because they were afraid that, okay, well, if the children learnt two languages, then they're going to get confused. And that, you know, when they go to school, because I think one of the reasons why they went into the foster homes as well was so that they could supposedly, so that they could learn English and engage more in the culture. But when they go to school and then, you know, their English isn't very good and it's very mixed up, this would impact on their educational attainment in the long run. But obviously one of the reasons why our parents came here was to give themselves and also us the better opportunities.
Now, Naa Adjelley, I speak 3 African languages absolutely fluently. The 4th one's a bit ropey, but I still get around with great confidence. How does this chime with you, the idea that a child need only be raised with one language, so that there is a focus on proficiency in that language, because that's a language that's going to determine the kind of job you're going to get, and so forget about everything else?
I think there is a limited understanding in terms of the brains of children, because as I understand it, children can learn up to 5 languages with no particular issues
Side
at
by
all.
side.
Side by side.
Same
And
time.
we can even just look at examples of other migrant communities to know that some of the highest positions held in the world are held by people who speak more than one language. So that idea, I think, is that I think the people that kind of push that forward, it might be rooted in some element of ignorance and some element of colonial mentality, because I know that there are children who were born speaking the language, then went to school and were told, and the schools told the parents that they're struggling with the English, and so you might want to consider, you know, and because the parents are not really understanding, they would rather opt for you not to learn your language so that you'll be able to speak the English well, again, because English is being held on the pedestal.
Louisa, let me come to you on this one. This is the biggest question when it comes to this issue, is that if the children don't speak their native or ancestral languages, they become somehow stripped of their cultural identity. And whereas they will grow up British, holding a British passport, but feeling not quite 100% British or not being accepted by the wider society, but then they haven't got anything else to fall back on because they're alienated from their cultural heritage. What is the impact for the individual and for society based on the work you've done?
Okay, so I think for let's step back really, because when we're talking about identity, I think there's lots of different components that make us who we are. I mean, obviously where we're born, that's one thing. You know, our heritage is one thing, whether we can speak the language or not. And I think the language does give you that extra element, because what it does, it means that you have those particular kind of nuances. You understand certain social situations. So let's just say, for instance, I go to a Ghanaian funeral, and if I could speak to you fluently, you know, I would know, okay, I would know what to say, I would know how to act, I would know how to do this, that and the other. So I feel like for me, that side of my identity is missing. And this is one thing, again, that people
Because you
were
don't
actually
speak
saying.
for yourself.
It's not my choose, I'm going to admit this on camera, it's not great. It's not great. I mean, you know, I could probably...
But you are one of many. You're not a unicorn at all in that regard.
So, I mean, you know, I probably know enough to get by if anyone can understand me, but, you know, it's not great. But if I was more fluent, I think I would understand them little nuances. So in that aspect, it does feel like your identity is kind of missing. But then, as I say, you know, there are other facets of your identity. And I think when we talk about wider society, and especially now, like, you know, the way that black people are being treated in society, I think one of the key things is that we really need to know who we are, because I think a lot of the, you know, some of the problems that we're facing is that, like, we were talking about this in the green room, in the sense that, you know, sometimes people are turning on each other and everything. But I think if we have a sense of who we are, a sense of that would help us to understand where we're going. And I think, you know, language is a very important part of that.
Naa Adjelley, what she's saying is that basically people who are connected to their roots, their background, their languages, inter alia, make better citizens. What was your experience? Because you are self-taught in Ghana, aren't you? Pretty much.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
What's really weird is that I learned as an adult, and I found that society, they are more accepting of Ghan children not being born outside of the UK, not being able to speak, than Ghan children born outside but not speaking well. You are going to face more trauma if you don't speak it well, rather than if you don't speak it at all. So I understand what they're saying, but for me, because the importance of the culture, I found by being able to speak the language, it was the foundation of me understanding even more about my culture. I think when you strip the child of the language, I think you reduce the whole culture, in my experience, to a form of entertainment. Like, many of us, we don't speak, but we know about the music, we know about all the entertainment aspects. But when we are looking about the food and things like that, but when we're talking about the sciences and the principles and the, you know, the socio-economic aspects of our culture, they're underpinned by our language, and that shapes the culture. So I feel like when you understand the language, it's like a foundation to understanding a lot more. And when you understand the culture past the entertainment value, because the thing with entertainment and things that entertain, they go out of season. So when society decides that African culture is no longer fashionable, a lot of us are going to be like, okay, let's drop our Africanness. But when you understand the foundation and what our ancestors felt, and because our language is shaped by our principles and how we view our society, and society for our survival, that is still important to us today. So by understanding that, it doesn't go out of season. Your survival doesn't go out of season. So I think people need to understand that language is more than simply being able to communicate, but it's about understanding the framework and the principles that your people and people who look like you, how they think.
You've actually created flashcards which go back to explaining kind of the language, the vernacular, right up to and including the grammar that's used in the Ga language. When we come back after the break, we'll perhaps look into that a little bit more. But that's the end of part 3. Join us after the break when we'll be wrapping up the discussion on whether African children in the diaspora should learn their ancestral languages right here on Your Voice. Welcome back. You're watching Your Voice with me, Ted Kofi, and my guests, Dr. Louise Kwarteng and Naa Adjelley Gbojorr. Now, I should say you're an associate professor, and you know, in the academic world, titles are very important. So, Associate Professor Louise Kwarteng, let me ask you this. She said something about language and how fundamentally it underpins everything. Do you think parents are aware of the deficit that's left for their children when they don't teach them these languages?
I don't. Not all. Actually, I don't want to generalize, because some will and then some won't.
Right.
But I think for a lot of our generation and the generation before, I think they probably just didn't, because I think their focus was that they wanted us to kind of like assimilate and to do as well as we possibly could here. And as I was saying before, I think, you know, there was some concern amongst some of the Ghanaian parents that I spoke, some of the, you know, people that I spoke to, and they were saying that their parents were concerned that, again, you know, there was going to be some kind of confusion. So I don't think, I mean, it's a really tricky one, because on the one hand, it was like they wanted us to be sort of like Ghanaian archetypal kids, but then that was the big bit that was missing, and I don't think they probably realised. I think there was more focus on behaviour and you know, morals and stuff, but they didn't really think so much about the
the structural other issues that followed it. Naa Adjelley, what I love is that you've actually taken this thing one step back. You've created learning aids as part of, is it gadangme.com?
Yeah, the gadangme.com.
Yeah. And what do they do? What's their mission and purpose?
So when I was learning to speak the language, one of the struggles I had was finding resources. Right. And when I did find the resources weren't catered to people born in the diaspora who would not have engaged certain things. So if you're going to say a proverb in Ga, for example, if I have not seen a calabash before, the proverb is not going to make any sense to me.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to create a resource that was for such people, dealing with the basics of the language and the culture. So essentially what the Gadangme is an online resource for the basics of Gadangme culture, particularly for those born in the diaspora.
Right. It's so interesting that these things are absolutely critical to learning a language. Now, these are pictures of you that we're projecting onto the wall. What's going on there?
So one of the things that I realized when I was learning the culture is that people were very scared for me.
Who
they
was
were
scared for you?
like the community, the Ghanaian community seemed to be scared about where I'm going.
Okay.
One, it's not going to make me any money.
Right.
Two, like I would speak to the priestesses, because what I found is that the priestesses and the priests were usually the custodians for a lot of the traditions, because during colonizations they were ostracized. So it's almost like they were allowed to keep certain elements of the culture. And I started to realize that if I really wanted to get down to the sciences and the medicines and stuff, I need to go there. But there was a fear about engaging them. So what I do with these images is I'm almost trying to say, don't be scared. Be yourself and be true to who you are, and let people see it more often. So in that way, when they see it, they're not scared, especially people in the diaspora, because that kind of fearful mentality passes down to the children, and I'm challenging that essentially.
Very well done. It brings me to another question, which is that one of our polls that we did on Instagram, and the response to it was really quite strong. Do you think African languages are respected in the UK? And we have 3 of our respondents saying not at all, and it's a shambles. That's Dana Byfield. It's a no-brainer. Nobody likes it. That's Fifi Orleans Lindsay, and anything non-English isn't respected in the UK unless they can take over and manipulate it. That's Tyrone Chambers. So do you think African languages are respected by British culture?
Okay, so for instance, a couple of things here. So widely, no. I mean, when you look at, for instance, when you go to school, you're not taught anything. You're taught, I learned French, you can speak German, perhaps now you can do Spanish and Mandarin, but that's not considered. But then that said,
what's not considered?
I mean, so like an African language wouldn't be considered. It wouldn't even, we don't even go there. But then that said, I can see little pockets of something else happening. So now that, as you were saying, I think now it's becoming cooler to be African. Okay, right. It's becoming more accepted, and definitely down here. I mean, obviously popular culture has had a big thing there, and I still believe that we need to go a bit deeper culturally and see. But what I'm seeing is there's a researcher, his name's called Les Back, and Les Back did a piece of research in Southeast London, and he was just kind of talking about the ways that, you know, children from all different ethnic backgrounds, Vietnamese, white, African, Caribbean, they all mixed together, and they had what he called cultural syncretism. So that's whereby, you know, you're all taking different bits of each other's culture, and language is one of them. So it's mixing kind of like, you know, patois and Jamaican Cockney to come up with a whole new language. And I'm seeing that now. I'm kind of seeing that now because we're seeing more, it's certainly Southeast anyway, I'm seeing more, you know, kids from all different backgrounds using kind of like little African words here and there. And, you know, I remember once I was coming in from Lewisham and I was just sitting on the train and I heard these kids from all these different backgrounds using words like wahala, you know, like, you know, some odd tree words. I was like, wow, this is deep. So on the ground level, I think, you know, like with the younger generation, I think it's there. There's a cultural syncretism, but it needs to kind of come up a bit more.
Naa Adjelley, you have made this journey of cultural awakening in yourself. It involved you changing your name, did it?
Yes.
What happened?
So I think as I learned more about my culture, I was more proud. I became more proud who I am. I wanted to share who I am with the world. I wanted people to see what it was about. You know, I was seeing lots of young people wanting to do the same thing. And I realized that my ancestors came up with something that was so amazing that I just wanted to embody it everywhere I go. And then I also felt like one of the biggest things is that how somebody calls you and how you respond. And I didn't want to respond to a name that originated from my colonizers. If somebody was going to call me and call my spirit and call my body, it was going to be something that represented me and my ancestors. So as an adult, I decided, you know what, I'm going to change my name. That's the first thing. So now when people call...
What were you called before? If
I was called Carol.
Excuse me?
Carol. Do I look like a Carol? So yeah, I was called Carol before, and then about 8 years ago, I legally changed my name to Naa Adjelley, because that is my name, that is my heritage, that you cannot argue with, that is my bloodline, you cannot take that away from me, and that is who I am. And so it literally is almost like a prayer every time someone calls my name.
Now, in the first part, we had Dr. Nuur Hassan here, who's done some research, and he quoted other bits of research which indicated that the intellectual and emotional development of people who speak what they call their mother tongue, the first language they hear when they're born, and who are educated in it, greatly enhanced. I'm going to ask about what it would do for African children in the diaspora if they spoke their languages as citizens. As we know, we have huge issues around our contacts with the police. We have huge issues around stop and search. We have, you're an academic, we have huge issues around academic performance at GCSE level, at university level, and certainly Africans in the diaspora need to be tilting at the elite imperial colleges, Oxford universities, Cambridges, as well as the other universities. So what do you think, speaking their own native language, how can that affect all of those other outputs?
Okay, so I think generally one thing that talking to colleagues who actually teach language, one of the things that we always say is to have another language is a really, really important thing. So culturally it's important, spiritually it's important, but then also when it comes to kind of like employment, if you can say that you can speak another language, or like if you're applying to go to another university, then I think that's going to look really good on your CV. So I think that's one thing. But then also, I mean, aside from all of that, I think when you go home, that's, you know, that means that you can sort of like engage a lot more with the culture than if we don't speak it at all. And I think when you were talking about police, and one of the things that just kind of popped up in my mind was immigration.
Right.
So, you know, I've heard of situations where, I mean, even I was approached myself when someone sort of said that, you know, when you've got Ghanaians coming through the system and stuff, we need somebody to be able to translate into the language. When I was working at the Home Office, and again, you know, they were dealing with things like around religion and, you know, engaging in those communities. So it's useful in terms of employment, but then also it's useful on a kind of personal level.
Let me go to a couple of the polls that we ran. One of them was about young people and old people, about older people, about speaking an African language. We asked, were you embarrassed to speak an African language as a teen? 46% said yes, and 54% said no. Then as an adult, are you embarrassed to speak an African language in public? Only 3% said yes. A resounding 97% said they were not at all embarrassed to speak an African language as an adult. What's going on there? Naa Adjelley, explain.
I think part of it is now the society seeing being an African as being more fashionable. And so it is becoming more acceptable to express your Africanness, whether it be your language or the way you speak or the foods that you eat. But I also think that as you get older and you realize and you're shaping your identity and you realize that this is an essential part of your identity and you're trying to shape yourself as an individual, you want to have the opportunity to express that, and language is one of those ways of doing that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We're really coming to the end of our discussion today. Very quickly now, Associate Prof. Louise, tell me, should Africans learn their cultural languages, their ancestral languages?
Yes, I think they should.
Is it worth public money being spent on?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Same question for you, Naa Adjelley. Do you think that parents should ensure that their children in the diaspora learn their ancestral languages?
Yep, I feel that they should see speaking their language just as important as instilling moral code. So just as how you would engage the child in making sure they grow up morally right and upstanding, is the same way you should invest time and energy into making sure that your child can speak your ancestral language.
Naa Adjelley, Prof. Louise, sadly we have run out of time. That's all we have time for on this edition of Your Voice. Thank you to my guests in this part, Dr. Louise Kwarteng and Naa Adjelley Gbojorr, and of course to my earlier guests, Dr. Nuur Hassan and Isobel Pobee Mensah. And thank you for watching. I'm Ted Kofi. Please join us again next time here on Your Voice.
It seems extraordinary that there's nothing that the coronavirus doesn't touch.
All seen Black Lives Matter demonstrations.
Oppression is brought out.
It's unfortunate because I just feel like we're going down this road. We've been down this road before.
Things like we've had